Story credited to David. I guess I should start by saying I'm not one to get spooked easily. My name's Matt Gibson, just a regular guy living in Seattle. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company, nothing too exciting. I spend most of my time like any other 27-year-old, catching up with friends when I can, watching sports, sometimes hitting the gym. But what happened that one Christmas Eve? I haven't been able to shake it off, not even after all these years. It was the winter of 2017. My parents had just retired and decided to go on a cruise to celebrate. So, for the first time, I was spending Christmas alone in my small one-bedroom apartment. It didn't bother me too much at first. I wasn't really a holiday person anyway. But as the day wore on, I started feeling lonely. You know that kind of loneliness that sinks in slowly, wrapping around you until it's all you can think about? Yeah, that's where I was. To distract myself, I ordered some takeout and decided to binge watch whatever movies popped up on Netflix. The place was quiet, way too quiet, and I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone in almost a day. So I picked up my phone and texted my friend Eric, asking if he wanted to drop by. He responded a few minutes later saying he was busy with family, but that we'd catch up after the holidays. That's when I got a notification. My neighbor Ashley had posted on the apartment community board, "Did anyone else get a weird visit from some guy tonight?" It read. I frowned. Ashley was a single mom living right across the hall with her 8-year-old son, Ben. She usually kept to herself, and I'd never seen her post anything on the community board before. Curious, I sent her a quick message. "What's up, Ashley? Everything okay?" She responded almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for someone to reach out. "Yeah, kinda. Some guy came by earlier asking if I'd seen his dog. It was just weird." He looked off. "Did you call building security?" I asked. "I didn't think it was that serious," she replied, "but now I'm not so sure." I felt a bit uneasy but shrugged it off. Seattle was a big city and people were always losing pets around here. It didn't seem like a big deal, just some stranger knocking on doors. Still, something about her message nagged at me. Maybe it was the way she said he looked off. Around 9:30 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, made sure the front door was locked, and headed to my bedroom. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a faint knock. I paused, my toothbrush halfway to my mouth. Did I imagine that? Another knock, louder this time. I spat out the toothpaste and walked to the front door, peering through the peephole. At first I didn't see anyone, but then, in the corner of my vision, I caught movement, a shadow shifting slightly to the left. I hesitated, then cracked the door open, leaving the chain in place. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. A man stepped into view. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a faded black jacket and jeans. His hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But what really struck me was the look on his face. It was blank. No expression. Just empty. "Sorry to bother you," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Have you seen my dog?" I blinked, momentarily caught off guard. No, I haven't. What kind of dog is it?" "A brown one," he replied, still staring at me without blinking. "Okay. That was odd. Right, well, I haven't seen any dogs around here. Maybe you should try the park down the street. A lot of people walk their dogs there." He nodded, but didn't move. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, him just staring, and me holding the door slightly ajar, unsure of what to do. Finally, he whispered, "Can I come in?" My heart skipped a beat. "No, sorry, you can't come in," I said firmly. "Maybe try talking to building security." For a second, his expression shifted. His eyes narrowed just a bit, like he was annoyed, but then it was gone, replaced by that same vacant look. "Right," he murmured. "Right." He turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. I shut the door quickly, locking it and leaning against it, my mind racing. What the hell was that? I grabbed my phone and messaged Ashley again. "Hey, did the guy who came to your door ask about a dog?" "Yeah," she responded almost instantly. "Why? He was just at my place. Asked to come in." There was a long pause before she replied again. "Matt, don't open the door for him again. I just talked to Mrs. Howard in 2B. He asked her the same thing and she let him in." A chill ran down my spine. "What happened?" I typed back. She said he started acting weird, started asking her all these questions about her family, if she lived alone, stuff like that. She got scared and asked him to leave. He did, but now she's too freaked out to stay in her own apartment. I glanced at my front door, half expecting him to be standing there again. What was this guy's deal? Was he just a creep, or was it something more? As I sat there, contemplating whether to call the police, there was another knock, 3 sharp raps. I jumped, my heart pounding against my chest. I walked over to the door again, my hands trembling as I peered through the peephole. No one was there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe I was just imagining things, maybe. The door handle jiggled. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to do something. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the right buttons. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone trying to get into my apartment, I whispered frantically. He was here earlier asking about his dog, but now he's... Sir, stay on the line, is he still there? I looked through the peephole again. Nothing, just the empty hallway. No, he's gone now, I said, my voice still trembling. Okay, we're sending an officer to your building. Stay inside and don't open the door for anyone, understood? I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. Yeah, okay, thank you. I hung up and sank onto the couch, every muscle in my body tense. I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting it to burst open at any second. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Finally, I heard the sound of footsteps outside and a soft knock. Seattle PD. Is anyone home? I ran to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers stood there, one of them glancing up and down the hallway. I opened the door, relief flooding through me. Are you the one who called about a suspicious person? The officer asked. Yeah, that was me. He was just here. They took my statement, asking me to describe the man in detail. When I mentioned that he'd been knocking on other doors, their expressions turned serious. Sir, we've been getting calls like this all evening, one of them said. People across several neighborhoods have reported someone matching this description, but no one knows who he is or where he's coming from. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What does he want? The officer shook his head. We're not sure yet, but if he comes back, don't engage. Just call us immediately. They left soon after, and I locked the door behind them, still shaken. I barely slept that night, every creak and groan of the building sending a jolt of fear through me. The next morning I found out that several other residents had similar encounters. But the man, he was never caught. The police never found any leads. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he was after. Every Christmas since then, I double-check my locks and make sure I'm never alone. Because sometimes late at night, I still think I hear that knock, and I wonder if he's out there looking for his next door to open. Story credited to Michael. I've heard people talk about Christmas as this magical time of year, filled with joy, family, and the kind of warmth that only comes from being surrounded by loved ones. I used to feel that way too, but now, every time the holidays come around, I just can't shake the memory of what happened that one night on Christmas Eve. My name's Alex Daniels. I'm 28 years old, living in Allentown, Pennsylvania. For context, I work in sales for a pharmaceutical company. You know, one of those monotonous jobs where I'm cold calling doctors all day, trying to hit targets that always seem a bit too ambitious, but it pays the bills. I used to love Christmas. I mean, who doesn't? But after that night, it's never been the same. This story takes place in 2019. I remember it so clearly because it was the first Christmas my younger sister Jess was coming home from college. She'd moved out to Boston and I hadn't seen her since the summer. We'd always been close and I was excited to catch up. You know how it is, family gatherings, eggnog by the fireplace, opening presents in your pajamas. It was supposed to be a perfect holiday. But as always, work got in the way. A client emergency kept me at the office until 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve. By the time I packed up and hit the road, it was almost completely dark and snow had started falling in thick, heavy flakes. I still had a good 2-hour drive to my parents' house in Lancaster County. I knew my mom would be worried, calling to check on me every half hour, so I told myself I'd make up for it by getting there as quickly as possible. The first half of the drive was pretty uneventful, just me, my car, and an endless stretch of snow-covered highway. I was doing my best to navigate through the blizzard, keeping my eyes glued to the road. Not a single car in sight. It felt like I was driving through some isolated snow globe. I kept thinking it was strange that no one else was out, but I shrugged it off. Small towns, Christmas Eve. People are usually already home by then. I tried to turn on the radio to break the silence. Every station was playing Christmas music, of course. I settled on one of the classics, Silent Night, letting it fill the car. But as I rounded a bend in the road, something caught my eye. I eased up on the accelerator, my heart rate kicking up just a bit. There, standing on the side of the road, was a man. He was right on the edge of the shoulder, almost close enough to be hit by the side mirror. I nearly swerved but managed to slow down, squinting through the windshield. He was wearing a thick parka, jeans, and boots. Nothing too unusual for this kind of weather. He wasn't waving or anything, just standing there staring at the road. I don't know why, but something about the way he was just standing there felt off. Still, it's Christmas Eve, and it was freezing outside. I'm not heartless. The least I could do was roll down my window and ask if he needed help. I slowed down to a stop and leaned over, cracking the passenger window just an inch. "Hey, you okay out there?" He stepped forward, his breath visible in the cold air. He looked normal enough, mid-30s, clean-shaven, dark hair. His eyes were, well, I can't really describe them. They were sharp but distant, like he wasn't fully there. He nodded. "Yeah, I'm okay. My car broke down a few miles back. Do you think I could get a ride to the nearest town?" Now, I've seen enough movies to know how this sort of thing usually goes. Hitchhiker, middle of nowhere, bad weather. It's a classic setup. But in the moment, I didn't get any real bad vibes from him. He just looked tired, cold. I hesitated for a moment, then unlocked the door. "Yeah, sure. Hop in." He climbed into the passenger seat, brushing snow off his coat as he settled in. The scent of wet leather filled the car, mixed with something else, a faint metallic smell. I thought it might be the heater acting up, so I ignored it. "Thanks, man," he said, buckling his seatbelt. His voice was calm, even, but there was no relief in it. No gratitude, just words. "No problem," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "Where you headed?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window, his fingers tapping lightly on his knee. "Just home," he said eventually. "Trying to get home for Christmas." "Yeah, I get that," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. "Everyone's got someone they want to see tonight, right?" "Yeah," he murmured. "Everyone." Silence filled the car again. I tried to focus on driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way he kept staring out the window, not really looking at anything. Or maybe it was the way his hands were shaking, even though it was warm in the car. "So, where's your car?" I asked, hoping to get some kind of normal response. "Back there," he said, waving vaguely behind us. "It ran out of gas. No one's been by for hours." I glanced at the clock. It was a little past 9 p.m. The snow was coming down heavier now, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. "Yeah, not a great night to be stuck out here." "No," he agreed softly. "Bad night." I tried to keep the conversation going, but he didn't seem interested. Just kept staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. I couldn't help but notice the wet spot on his pants. Just a small one, but enough to suggest he'd been out in the snow for a while. Something wasn't adding up. Why would he be out here, on a road that barely anyone uses in the middle of a snowstorm? Why hadn't he called for help? We drove in silence for another few minutes, the tension in the car growing thicker with every passing second. Finally, I saw the lights of a small town up ahead. Relief washed over me. "This good for you?" I asked, pulling over near a gas station. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "This is good." I expected him to get out, but he didn't move. He just sat there, his hands resting on his knees. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. You need any money for gas or something?" He shook his head slowly, then turned to look at me. His eyes were dark, empty. "You shouldn't have picked me up." My heart skipped a beat. "What? You shouldn't have picked me up," he repeated, his voice almost mechanical. "He's still out there. What are you talking about?" I demanded, glancing nervously out the windows. But all I saw was snow and darkness. He smiled then, a slow, unsettling smile that made my skin crawl. "You'll see." Before I could respond, he opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the night. I sat there stunned, watching as his figure faded into the swirling snow. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. What the hell did he mean? I didn't wait to find out. I slammed the car into gear and sped off, not stopping until I was well past the town. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing in the middle of the road, staring after me. But there was nothing, just snow and silence. I still don't know what he meant, or who he was. But every Christmas Eve since, I've avoided that road. Because something tells me, whatever, or whoever he was talking about, it's still out there, waiting. Story credited to James. You know, I've never been one to believe in ghost stories or supernatural nonsense. But after what happened to me during Christmas of 2017, I don't know anymore. I was 26 at the time, working my first real job at a small marketing firm in Boston. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to get by. I hadn't been home to see my parents in almost a year, couldn't afford the time off or the train tickets. But that Christmas, I promised myself I'd make it back no matter what. The thing is, I didn't have a car, and the train tickets were too expensive because I waited until the last minute. The only option I had left was renting a car. I was hesitant since I'd never rented a car before, but I wanted to see my parents, so I bit the bullet and made the reservation. The car rental place was a tiny, hole-in-the-wall joint near my apartment, the kind of place where you wouldn't be surprised to see a few dents or a cracked windshield on the cars. But the guy at the counter, his name was Bill, I remember, assured me the car was in good condition. "Safe for long drives?" I asked, glancing out at the snow starting to swirl in the lot outside. Bill nodded, giving me this reassuring smile. "You'll be fine. Just take it slow. Weather's supposed to get nasty tonight." I almost backed out right then, but I was too committed. I signed the papers, tossed my suitcase in the trunk, and hit the road around 7 p.m. The car itself was an old, beat-up sedan, probably a decade or more past its prime, but it ran, and that was good enough for me. The drive started out uneventfully. The snow fell softly at first, like a gentle reminder that Christmas was right around the corner. Traffic was light, and I made good time. I even called my dad to let him know I'd be there by midnight. But then, somewhere outside of Schenectady, the snow started coming down harder, the kind of blizzard that makes you question whether you should be on the road at all. I could barely see the car in front of me, and every few miles I'd pass another vehicle pulled over to the side, hazard lights blinking in the whiteout. I slowed down, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. My phone lost signal somewhere along the way, and I remember glancing at it, seeing the little no-service icon pop up. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I just needed to get off the highway and find a safe place to pull over until the storm let up. And that's when I saw her. Standing on the side of the road, just beyond the guardrail, was a woman. She was bundled up in a long, dark coat, her face turned away from the road. My headlights caught her just as I passed, and I swear I felt my heart skip a beat. There was no car, no other sign of life around. Just her. "Maybe she's stranded," I murmured to myself, glancing in the rearview mirror. I thought about stopping, but something held me back. Something, I don't know, off. I kept driving, my eyes darting back to the mirror until I couldn't see her anymore. Maybe she'd gotten out of a car and was just stretching her legs. I tried to shake it off, but then, about 20 minutes later, I saw her again. Same coat, same posture, standing right by the guardrail. I hit the brakes, the tires skidding slightly on the icy road. I glanced around, but there was no car in sight. Just like before, I knew it had to be a coincidence. There was no way it was the same woman. But what were the odds? A part of me, somewhere deep down, wanted to turn around, maybe ask if she needed help. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles had gone white. I drove on, telling myself it was just the storm messing with my head, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It happened again. Every few miles I'd see her, standing in that same spot, always just beyond the guardrail, her face turned away. By the fifth time, I was practically in a panic. I knew there was no logical explanation for it, and yet, there she was. "Just get off the highway," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Find a rest stop or a gas station, anywhere with lights, with people." I turned off at the first exit I could find, Williamsville. I'd never heard of it before, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that highway, from that woman. The exit ramp was narrow and dark, lined with thick pine trees, and the snow was falling heavier than ever. I crept down the road, my headlights barely cutting through the darkness. And then, there she was again, standing at the end of the exit ramp, right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. This time, I couldn't pretend it was a coincidence. There was no way she could have gotten here before me. No way she could have known I'd take this exit. "Hey!" I called out, rolling down the window. My breath fogged up the glass. "Are you okay?" She didn't move, didn't turn around. She just stood there, her back to me, like she hadn't heard me at all. "Ma'am!" I tried again, my voice shaking. I didn't know what to do. She was blocking the road and I couldn't just run her over. But something in me, some primal instinct, was screaming to get away. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. I didn't want to get out. I couldn't. Slowly, she turned her head, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her face. Her eyes, they were dark, hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. And her lips, they moved, but no sound came out. "Sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. "I have to go." I hit the gas, swerving around her, my tires spinning on the icy road. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her watching me drive away, but she wasn't there. She'd disappeared. I drove through Williamsville like a madman, barely noticing the empty streets and dark houses. I didn't stop until I reached my parents' house hours later. By then, the storm had let up, and I was a mess, shaking, my body drenched in sweat. My parents were waiting for me, worried sick. "Did something happen?" my dad asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe. I'm not sure." I didn't tell them about the woman on the highway. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. And every Christmas since, whenever I drive down that highway, I can't help but look to the side of the road, expecting to see her there, waiting.